Imagine going to a concert. The lights dim, the crowd, goes completely quiet. The artist walks onto the stage, flips a single switch on a metal box to generate this ear-piercing, mosquito-like electronic beep.
Right.
She takes her hands away and then does absolutely nothing for an hour.
Which is just wild to think about.
I mean, to most people, that sounds like an elaborate prank. But to the global art world, it is considered a masterpiece.
Yeah, it really challenges every single instinct we have developed about music, about entertainment, and even just the basic utility of sound itself.
Because we're so used to sound doing a job for us.
Exactly. We are deeply conditioned to expect audio to do something for us. Like to distract us on a commute, or to manipulate our emotions during a movie, or just to mask the drone of the office. So to walk into a room and strip all of that utility away, it's a profoundly disorienting experience.
And leaning into that disorientation is exactly the mission of today's deep dive. We are digging into a really fascinating column from Monumental Movement Records titled When Sine Waves Change Space.
Such a great piece.
It is. It focuses on the Japanese sound artist Sachiko M. And our goal today is to explore the absolute, razor-thin edge of musical minimalism. We want to understand how a single, unchanging, barely audible frequency can completely rewire how you experience the physical dimensions of a room.
And the flow of time.
Right, and even the biological mechanisms inside your own ear.
Yeah, so to set the baseline for what she is actually doing, we kind of have to look at what she is actively rejecting.
Okay.
Because traditional music, whether it's, a symphony or a pop song on the radio, it relies entirely on variables to hold your attention. It uses shifting melodies, complex rhythms, interlocking harmonies.
Changes in volume.
Exactly. Changes in volume to build a narrative arc. There is constant movement. And Sachiko M strips absolutely all of those variables away. She uses what is called a pure sine wave to create a sustained static environment rather than a traditional song. It's really a relentless exploration of the threshold between the presence and the absence of sound.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the concept of a sine wave gets thrown around a lot in audio circles.
Yeah.
But we rarely stop to define what it actually is compared to the sounds we hear every day.
True.
The sources contrast it with the piano. So if we think of a normal piano note as a rich, beautifully textured oil painting, a sine wave is just a single, raw, laser beam of light.
I love that analogy.
But why is that? Mechanically speaking, what makes the piano note an oil painting?
It comes down to something called overtones. When you strike a key on a piano, let's say middle C, the hammer hits the string, and you hear the fundamental frequency of that note. But that string doesn't just vibrate as one long piece.
Right, it's doing a bunch of things at once.
It simultaneously vibrates in halves and in thirds and fourths and so on. Each of those fractional vibrations creates a higher-pitched, fainter note playing at the exact same time as the main note.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and your brain blends all of those mathematical layers, dozens of them, into a single sound. That is what gives a piano its texture or its timbre.
So a naturally occurring sound is actually a massive chord of tiny vibrations playing all at once.
Precisely. Now, a sine wave strips all of that harmonic math away. It is just the fundamental frequency oscillating back and forth with zero overtones.
No texture at all.
None. It doesn't even exist in nature. It has to be synthesized electronically. And Sachiko M creates this using a very specific tool. It's a test tone generator.
Wait, like the thing audio engineers use?
Exactly. It's a utilitarian piece of equipment usually used to test whether speakers are wired correctly. It is not something you would typically find on a concert stage. She dials in a fixed frequency, and then she sustains it, completely unaltered, for a massive amount of time.
I have to say, I'm struggling to picture this as an actual performance. I want to play the skeptic for a second here.
Please do.
Because if I buy a ticket to a show, and an artist just walks on stage, turns on a calibration test tone, and refuses to touch the volume or change the pitch, I mean, isn't that just objectively boring?
Yeah.
Like, if there's zero physical action or musical development, where is the art?
Yeah, no, the discomfort you are describing is exactly the mechanism of the art. The performance isn't about what the artist is physically doing. It's about the psychological shift that her lack of action forces upon you, the listener.
Oh, interesting.
Because there is no development, the performer, in the traditional sense, practically vanishes. You aren't watching a virtuoso sweat over a guitar solo. Your brain realizes there is nothing to watch on stage, and the focus violently shifts onto the physical space itself.
And onto your own body within that space.
Exactly.
Because the sound refuses to entertain you, your brain eventually hits a wall. Your auditory processing centers are desperately looking for a melody to follow, a beat to tap your foot to, And when they realize the pattern is never going to change, they just give up.
They surrender.
Yeah. I think of it like staring at a blank, brightly lit white wall. For the first minute, the wall is overwhelming and bright. But if you keep staring, your eyes adjust, your visual cortex gets bored of the white expanse, and suddenly you start to see the tiny specks of dust catching the light.
Floating in the air in front of the wall.
Right. The wall just becomes the backdrop for microscopic ballet you would have completely ignored otherwise.
That transition maps beautifully onto the auditory experience. It forces a cognitive shift from the active, expectant state of hearing to a passive, highly sensitive state of noticing.
From hearing to noticing, that's a huge distinction.
It is. Because you can't track a melody in a static sine wave, your ears suddenly pick up on the hum of the gallery's air conditioning unit. You hear the rustling of a stranger's jacket halfway across the room.
You become hyper-aware of the breathing of the people around you.
Yeah. The sine wave acts as an auditory spotlight, illuminating the microscopic soundscape of the environment.
And the sources mention a really intense biological reaction that happens during this process, too. Listeners frequently report a sensation similar to tinnitus.
Yes.
The sine wave stops feeling like it's coming from a speaker across the room, and it starts feeling like it is physically ringing from inside your own skull. Why does our biology react to a pure tone that way?
So it has to do with how the inner ear functions. Inside your cochlea, there are thousands of microscopic hair cells that convert sound waves into electrical signals for your brain. Normal music, with all its varying frequencies and overtones, excites different hair cells constantly.
Kind of like fingers dancing across a keyboard.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
But a pure, sustained sine wave forces the exact same tiny group of hair cells to fire relentlessly, without a break.
Oh, so they just get exhausted.
Yeah, it causes localized auditory fatigue. Because the sound is so pure and unchanging, your brain loses its spatial reference points and struggles to externalize the source. The boundary between the external architecture of the room and your internal biology completely blurs.
It's literally hacking your biological hardware. It makes me think about John Cage.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, his famous piece, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, where the performer sits at the piano and plays nothing for 4.5 minutes. That's usually the go-to example of exploring silence in music.
What's fascinating here is that Cage is the necessary comparison, but they're doing two very different things.
How so?
Well, Cage's intention was to frame the natural, ambient, environmental noise of the concert hall as the music itself. He was telling the audience, listen to the world is the composition.
Right.
Sachiko M goes a step further. She isn't just putting a frame around silence. She is using an artificial, almost imperceptible microsound as a tuning fork for reality.
A tuning fork for reality.
Yeah, by introducing a sound that hovers right on the edge of nothingness, she proves that absolute silence doesn't actually exist. We just have to be pushed right up against the threshold to realize it.
So if this sine wave completely hacks your individual brain when you are sitting alone in a gallery, imagine what happens when you introduce it into a room full of other musicians trying to play their own instruments.
Wild.
Because this intense focus on microsounds didn't just pop up in a vacuum. It evolved out of a very specific approach to live collaboration in the 1990s Japanese improvisation scene.
This period is so crucial for understanding her trajectory. Sachiko M was a pivotal figure in this movement, collaborating with highly influential artists like Yoshiteru Tomo and Toshimaru Akiyama. And this scene developed a philosophy that came to be known as reductionism.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I have to admit, I'm genuinely confused by how this would work in practice.
It's tough to wrap your head around at first.
Because when I think of musical improvisation, I picture a jazz club. The saxophonist plays a riff, the drummer reacts to the rhythm, the bassist shifts the harmony. It's all about real-time reaction. If improvisation is about reacting to the people around you, and she refuses to change her pitch or volume, how is she actually reacting?
Right.
Isn't she just ignoring the other musicians on stage?
From a traditional jazz perspective, it absolutely looks like ignoring them. But in the reductionist scene, improvisation wasn't about instant creation or rapid reaction. It was an exercise in extreme, almost painful restraint.
Restraint.
Yes. Instead of asking, what can I add to this moment, the improviser is constantly asking, what can I withhold? Imagine the discipline required to stand on a stage while another musician plays a faint scrape on a cymbal, and actively resisting the urge to respond with a louder sound. Your contribution is your unwavering commitment to a single sonic condition. But more importantly, she's reacting, just not emotionally.
Maybe.
She relies on the physical properties of acoustics to do the interacting for her.
Ah, right, the physics of it. When her pure sine wave physically travels through the air and collides with the microsounds of other instruments, it creates actual physical acoustic interference.
Yes, and this is where the underlying mechanisms get truly fascinating. In acoustics, sound travels as waves of high and low pressure. When you have two frequencies that are very close to each other floating in the same room, say Sachiko M is holding a tone at 440 hertz,
Okay.
and an amplifier hums at 441 hertz, those sound waves physically bump into each other. For a split second, the peaks of those waves align, which is called constructive interference, and the volume literally doubles.
Always.
And then a split second later, the peak of one wave hits the valley of the other, which is destructive interference, and they cancel each other out into silence.
So mechanically, that constant cycle of boosting and canceling out creates a pulsing rhythm.
Exactly. You hear a physical wub 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 sound in the room. This phenomenon is called beats. But that rhythm isn't being played by a human drummer. It isn't being triggered by a computer sequencer.
It's just math.
It is a naturally occurring physical phenomenon born entirely from the mathematical collision of sound waves in the air.
The music stops being an expression of human emotion. Like an artist trying to convey sadness or joy. It becomes an observable condition of physics. She isn't performing a song, she is setting up the environmental conditions for a physical event to occur.
Yes. In fact, the sources specifically refer to this as setting conditions. The resulting audio arises from the spatial relationship between the elements, rather than the intention of a performer's hands.
Because her work acts so much more like a physical condition or environmental state, regular music venues eventually stopped making sense for her art.
No, you definitely couldn't do this in a normal club.
Right. You can't really set up delicate acoustic interference patterns in a sticky floored rock club with a noisy bar in the back.
The environment was fundamentally hostile to the work. So by the 2000s, Sachiko M's performances largely migrated away from concert halls and found a permanent home in museums and gallery spaces.
That makes total sense.
Her sound transitioned from being a temporal event, a concert that starts at 8 and ends at 10, into an invisible architectural sculpture.
Let's talk about the physics of why this works so well in a gallery space, using the frequency model from the sources. Because Sachiko M often uses very high frequencies, usually between 2 kilohertz and 10 kilohertz, sometimes pushing even higher toward the absolute limit of what the human ear can detect.
Way up there, yeah.
Mechanically, how does a high frequency behave differently in a room than a normal band?
It comes down to wavelengths. A bass guitar note has a massive physical wavelength, sometimes 30 or 40 feet long.
Oh, wow, that big.
Yeah, it rumbles the floor, it penetrates the drywall, and physically pressurizes the entire room. A rock band essentially turns the air thick with sound. But a 10 kilohertz sine wave has a physical wavelength of just over an inch.
An inch.
Just over an inch. It is incredibly thin, and it is highly directional, shooting out like an arrow rather than exploding like a bomb.
So because she is only occupying a tiny microscopic fraction of the audible frequency spectrum, she leaves vast, gaping acoustic gaps in the room. She isn't dominating the auditory space. She's taking up the absolute minimum amount of real estate possible.
Exactly. And because those acoustic gaps are left wide open, the environmental sounds of the gallery, the footsteps on the concrete floor, the distant hum of traffic outside the window, they have room to thrive and become part of the composition.
They fill in the gaps.
Right. But even more critically, that short wavelength interacts with the architecture itself in a process involving phase.
What does that mean for the person walking around the gallery?
Well, because the wave is so thin and directional, it bounces cleanly off the hard gallery walls, the glass, the floor. The reflected waves crash back into the waves coming directly from the speaker.
Creating more interference.
Exactly, creating complex standing waves in the room. This means if you are standing in one spot, you might be in a valley where the sound cancels itself out and it's totally quiet. But if you take 2 steps to your left, you might hit a peak where the sound is suddenly piercing.
That's incredible.
The art literally sounds physically different depending on your coordinates. You are essentially using this tiny beep to echolocate the exact dimensions and materials of the room. The space itself becomes the speaker.
It's amazing to think that just shifting your weight from one foot to the other changes the composition entirely. And she often plays these high frequencies at the absolute threshold of human hearing, right?
Yes, very often.
It's so quiet that it demands your participation. If you actively pay attention to it, you hear it piercing through the room.
Mm.
But the second you lose focus or look at your phone, it vanishes. The sound stops being a concrete object and becomes a process of your own attention span.
This is a monumental shift in how we perceive art. The sound is no longer an object on a pedestal that you passively observe. It is a fragile process that only exists if you are actively participating in the perception of it.
It makes me think of her 2001 album, I'm Here, which the sources point to as her masterpiece. If you put this record on, objectively speaking, nothing happens.
Nothing at all.
It is just the tone. The tone sits there, hovering. And because there is no rhythm to mark the passing of seconds or minutes, your perception of time warps. You completely lose track of how long you've been listening.
The suspension of time is such a vital component of minimalism. The sources actually draw a parallel to the mid-century composer Morton Feldman, who was famous for pieces that lasted 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours.
6 hours.
Yeah, Feldman wanted time to feel like a landscape you were standing in, rather than a road you were driving down. But Sachiko M achieves that exact same temporal suspension not by writing a massive 6-hour score, but by reducing the elements to almost zero. Time stops flowing forward and simply becomes a static state of being.
So what does this all mean? Why does diving into the mechanics of a barely audible, unchanging beep in the Japanese improvisation scene of the 90s matter to you, the listener, going about your day-to-day?
It's a great question.
And I think it goes back to what we touched on at the very beginning. We live in an era of unprecedented information overload. Your attention is the most valuable commodity on Earth, and it is being aggressively harvested by notifications, content feeds, and the sheer noise of modern existence.
It's exhausting.
It really is. Sachiko M's extreme reductionism acts as an antidote to that overstimulation.
Yeah, the sources describe her work beautifully as a re-education of perception. By stripping absolutely everything away, she forces your sensory apparatus to reboot. She proves that when you remove the noise, your senses don't shut down, they actually sharpen. They expand to fill the void.
She takes the volume dial of the world and turns it all the way down, not so you can tune out, but so you can finally wake up and hear the mechanisms of what's actually there.
If we synthesize the core philosophy we've unpacked today, it's this. We conventionally think of sound as something that takes up time. A 3-minute song takes up 3 minutes of your day.
Right.
But Sachiko M proves that sound is actually something that creates space. When a sound almost disappears, when it hovers right on the edge of nothingness, the physical existence of the space around you and your own biological presence within it becomes vividly, undeniably clear.
Sound creating space. It completely flips the paradigm and leaves me with a final thought I want to pass on to you. We spend an enormous amount of energy trying to curate our auditory lives. We buy heavy noise-canceling headphones to block out the world, and we pump in our hyper-curated playlists to engineer our moods. But the next time you walk into a completely quiet room, maybe it's your office after everyone has gone home, your bedroom late at night, or just an empty tiled hallway, don't reach for your headphones. Take one single second to actively listen to the silence. What if the rhythmic hum of the fridge compressor in the kitchen, or the muffled distant sound of tires on pavement 3 blocks away, isn't just an interruption to your peace? What if it's an improvised spatial symphony, and you are finally hearing the mechanisms of it for the very first time?